also a change of hearts, not only in Riyadh, but also from Washington?
No, I don't think so. We've had a very close and very strong U.S.-Saudi relationship for years. In the past year or so, we had some bumps in that, partly because of the U.S. Negotiations with Iran over the nuclear program and the degree to which we were or were not coordinating with Saudi Arabia. But the fact is that we have extraordinary common interests in the Middle East region in fighting the terrorists that are there, preventing them from controlling territories such as they do in Syria and Iraq, trying to stabilize other parts of the region, and to counter Iranian influence in the Persian Gulf and the effort of Iran to spread its influence through the wider region. So we share enormous common interest, in the partnership we have with Saudi Arabia, I'm sure, will continue for a very long time to come.
On our TV, you can also see the footages of the recent visit by U.S. President and the First Lady to Saudi Arabia. Having said that, though, Professor Batafi, can you help us to understand, though? There have been quite a number of occasions, important occasions, that Washington does not really see eye to eye with Riyadh. For example, about rebel forces inside Syria, about the forever gone of Mubarak, which is an Arab ally, and also about what is going on between Washington and Tehran about that nuclear deals. Saudi Arabia is not necessarily happy about some of these. Professor Batafi?
Yes, of course, between even family members, there are always some disagreements and misunderstanding. It seems our interest diverged in a number of issues. One of them is in Syria, the other in Yemen, and in Iraq, of course. And the one element that connects all this together is Iran. I believe America, at a moment of inspiration by its president, thought that they could change the games of the rules by trusting the new government in Iran to do what no other governments have done before. It's part maybe of the president's legacy to leave, that he could get Iran back on track with the world and with America. And to do this, he had to sacrifice a little bit some of the trust that has been built over 70 years between U.S. and Saudi Arabia, and to maybe get some angry remarks here or there. But I think they will soon see the light that the Iranians are playing a game with them, and their final and ultimate goal is to control the whole region, and that's not going to be in the best interest of anyone, including the United States of America.
Let me go back to Ambassador Volker. Certainly you need to comment here. Of course, we all understand from all over the world there's a Sunni-Shia divide represented by Saudi Arabia and Iran in the region. What do you think about the comments from your counterparts earlier? And how is the U.S. likely to keep that balance, or not balancing at all?
Well, I think our colleague in Saudi Arabia is exactly right. I think that the Iranian regime is not taking the negotiations seriously, is not intent on changing its policies. It continues to support other terrorist groups in the region, including Hezbollah. So I agree with his analysis of what we see with the Iranian government. And also, I think the Obama administration has been a little bit, I don't want to say naive, but I think over-willing to engage Iran in the hopes that their policies might change when we see no evidence that they're going to do so.
Right.
In the case of Syria, we are actually working together very closely with Saudi Arabia. Our militaries are working together to engage in strikes on ISIS. Where we differed was over which groups deserved support inside Syria. And I think that our views on this have actually converged over time as the situation has clarified. Is really a choice between Assad and ISIS. We don't want either one, neither does Saudi Arabia, and we are working together to fight back against them.
The ISIS one is certainly a very complicated one. We're going to discuss that in detail a little bit later. But before we go there, I still want to ask back our Saudi Arabia expert. particularly about the fact of the views coming from Washington at this moment, because we know Washington is trying to keep that balance, but there's also a difference between the Republican and the Democratic parties when it comes to their policy towards Saudi Arabia. Certainly Ambassador Volker just demonstrated that in his comments. Having said that, though, what do you think is the most important barometer Saudi Arabia is looking at when it comes to your relations with the United States, sir? Professor Badafi?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you. Say the question again.
From the Saudi perspective, which barometer is the most important when you value or assess the relations with Washington? You said quite a number of list of important issues, but which is the most important to you at this moment?
Right now in the region, you mean?
Yes.
I believe Yemen is the most hot spot right now, and it's on the border, and it's becoming very uncontrollable, and things are happening on hourly base. We need some commitment from the United States, some clearance, some transparency about their negotiation with the Houthis and with the Iranians about this. Transparency was always an issue with the Obama administration. They have been talking to Iran for years and they never told us. And they are doing things that, I mean, friends should be more transparent with each other. And the administration promised King Abdullah to be more transparent, but in the issue of the Houthis, we really don't understand what's going on, what's the United States stand is.
All right. Mr. Tang, you've been attentively listening to both of the guests coming from Saudi Arabia and the United States. You see, just over the past few years, suddenly an explosion of extremism, terrorism in the region, and it's spreading to other parts of the world, recently reflected also in Europe. What do you think about the importance of this relations between Saudi Arabia and the United States? Is it really likely to continue as it used to be during the golden years of the Reagan administration, where there's a hike because there's a common enemy, so-called the former Soviet Union? Is it likely to repeat itself, or this is getting ever more pragmatic?
Actually, we have witnessed ups and downs, in the relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States since the ending of the Cold War. Immediately after the Cold War, I think Saudi Arabia was a strong supporter for the United States to organize an ally against Iraq, for the recovery of the Kuwait. And then the 9/11 attack. Actually, some terrorists, they share the citizenship of Saudi Arabia.
15 out of the 19.
Yeah. So I think at that time, I think the two countries really faced a very challengeable situation, but they settled all the disagreement and they continue the relationship. And now, especially after President Obama entered the White House, he adopted a very different policy toward Middle East. Actually, he withdrew the United States troops from that region. And this is not only the presence of military, but also the political influence.
Right.
The declining of the political influence in Middle East by the United States actually left that region a vacuum of power, a disorder. So,
but Mr. Tang, let me just comment here a bit, because we've been hearing very conflicting comments coming from some scholars. On the one hand, if the U.S. is having military bases or some military presence in certain region, U.S. will be argued as trying to interfere into others' issues. If the U.S. is not putting the military over there, the U.S. will be blamed as not interested in the region, and therefore just let the region go into chaos. You just made the statement earlier. What exactly is your attitude toward these kind of very different attitudes usually?
It's actually a determination by President Obama. Before his campaign for the president, in 2008, actually he had promised that he would withdraw all the military troops from Iraq, from Afghanistan, and he did it in recent year.
Yes.
So I think this is actually determination and not a military issue for the United States and for the whole region. Who can, be the key player, dominant player to control all the situation in that region.
Right. There's security issues, there's energy issues, there's also different kinds of arms sales issues between Saudi Arabia and the United States. But at this moment, many people are asking, which country is needing the other more? Saudi for the U.S. or U.S. for the Saudi? Let's look at some of the issues related to that. First of all, the politics of oil. From crude oil imports of nearly 11 million barrels a day in June 2006, the U.S. was already down to buying only 7 million barrels a day in June last year. And of course, this year, you also see more shale gas coming from the U.S. and the oil gas price has been tumbled dramatically. And therefore, Ambassador Volker, is the U.S. still talking to the Saudis on the energy issue, or this is such a sidelined issue these days compared to terrorism and also regional security? Ambassador.
Well, yeah, the oil and the gas, the energy issues, there's something that, of course, you do talk with Saudi Arabia about, but they haven't been driving the relationship between the two for a very long time. It is a factor in global markets. It's a factor in global prices. We've seen the decline in oil prices affect Russia and Venezuela, and that's actually fortuitous. But we have very little influence over Saudi decision-making on its production. They clearly are keeping their production up in order to try to maintain market share.
Right.
And the issues that really drive the cooperation between the two countries are the ones we've been talking about. It's the issue of Iran, it's the issue of terrorism and extremism, it's regional stability in the Middle East. And those are ones that are the heart of the relationship now.
May I just follow up a little bit, Ambassador Volker? First of all, there is the issue about the human rights issue between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia, and how women are being treated. Even this time, the First Lady going to Saudi Arabia now wearing a scarf has become such a big news in the social media in Saudi Arabia. That certainly reflected to a certain extent. That's one thing. The other thing is about to what extent can U.S. and Saudi Arabia work together for the regional security? Because every country has its own ego. You obviously understand that. Meanwhile, what about this cooperation for against terrorism, particularly against ISIS? This has become the biggest topics, but it seems neither side has been able to tackle it to the core, particularly from Saudi Arabia. 15 out of 19 earlier, as we mentioned, September 11th terrorist attacks. Terrorists are actually with those kind of national identity. So your thoughts on these 3 points, briefly, if you can.
Yeah, it's a very difficult problem. You have a vast Muslim world, billions of people, and there is within that a very sharp divide between those who are general believers in the faith of Islam and those who are motivated by violent terrorist hatred and extremism. Saudi Arabia has been the heart of a conservative religious identity for a good part of the Muslim world, and yet at the same time is a target of some of these most extreme elements and has gone to fight against them. Getting that balance right is something that Saudi Arabia has struggled with. It's something that we struggle with. Take the issue of the headscarf and Michelle Obama. Even in this country, there's a debate this morning about whether that was the right thing for her to do or not, whether she should not wear a headscarf because she's free as an American to do as she wishes, or whether it's a sign of respect for a culture and a religion. And here I think probably the balance of opinion is that we should show respect and differentiate the heart of the culture and the heart of Islam from the extremists and terrorists.
So much difference in terms of culture, ideology. Well, at the same time, all facing terrorism, even though from different perspectives. Professor Badavi, what do you think, where can be the real step for cooperation now between Saudi Arabia and the U.S. when you have a new leader already in the office, even though the agenda could be quite similar?
Well, he's new and not new at the same time.
Of course.
See, King Salman was always have been one of the main decision makers in Saudi Arabia for about 50 years. So, and in the last few years, he was the crown prince and the defense minister And in the case of, because King Abdullah was sick,
that's right.
Most of the time he was also he chaired the Council of Ministers. So I don't think there's going to be much of change. Of course, every leader comes with his creative ideas about solving the problems facing the country, and and how to achieve the same goals set by the system or by the government. So I expect King Salman to come with more creative ideas to solve these problems. But the major issue in Saudi Arabia now, it's not the oil, it's not the Saudi-America relation, it's actually terrorism. And as our friend in Washington said, actually, I would add a bit of information that eight times more Muslims are killed in terrorism attacks than non-Muslims. So in Saudi Arabia, we suffered from terrorism, and terrorists even tried to kill our Interior Minister, Mohammed bin Naif, at one point. Yeah, so we are here, on the same boat, and we would like to make our cooperation work better. For example, there is one difference here. Saudis think that we should not only focus on on Daesh, because it's just one element of many. Hezbollah is another terrorist organization. There are other Shia terrorist organizations in the region, and there is also government-sponsored terrorism, like the Bashar government is doing to its people. So why are we just focusing on one group and leaving the others?
All right.
And that will encourage. That's a very recruiting help for Daesh to see that the bias is against Sunni Muslims and not just a stand against terrorism.
Certainly, there are a lot of different views, even on the same challenges, as the Chinese would say, same bed, different dreams, as they say. Well, of course, it's just an analogy, but we're looking forward to the so-called new solution and creative ideas that both of you, or rather three of you, have mentioned in our program. Thank you so much for the three of you, gentlemen, for coming over to our program. Teng Jianxun here in Beijing, and Professor Khalid Patafi in Saudi Arabia. Meanwhile, Ambassador Kurt Volker inside Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for being with us. And you want to stay with us here on World Insight. We've got plenty more coming up next, including I am living it. Fast food giant McDonald's faces hard times with sales slumping in the U.S. and food scandals abroad. And worked to death with young people's health in decline. Many point to the finger at the stress of modern life here in China.
A new direction for tourism in Yunnan. Terraces in the clouds, dreams on the Red River. Let's meet in Langzhou, Old Town in Sichuan.
Keeping the Shenzhou spacecraft in orbit, keeping your equipment running longer. Challenges that spur Sinopec lubricants to higher levels of excellence. Providing protection at aerospace level. Sinopec lubricants.
Shopping center, dining center, entertainment center, leisure center. Wanda Plaza, the center of the city. Let's meet